Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Super Tease video. And Blizzard has made a big announcement when it comes to battleground content in Dragonflight, and in 10.2 they are going to be experimenting with a new battleground format. Now, myself personally, having gotten into the first iteration of rated battlegrounds back into Cataclysm, being one of the highest rated players at that time, I really loved them in Cataclysm. They were honestly one of the best experiences, honestly a highlight moment throughout my entire trek of playing World of Warcraft over this many years. I can remember the teams that we had going up against each other, always trying to out-damage the god of damage on his balanced druid when our teams would go head-to-head, and it was definitely like a highlight moment, setting up smoke bombs, solar beams on flag carriers, and trying to take them down. And honestly, it's kind of tragic what has happened to Battlegrounds in the format moving forward throughout expansion after expansion after expansion. And to be fair, a lot of the contributing factors to its downfall has been related to the community, whether it be through cheating or just, toxicity in general and interactions with players and what goes on with that. Now, this format could alleviate a lot of those, or it could absolutely triple down on making those things worse. They are going to be introducing Battleground Blitz, which is going to be a battleground version of the Arena Solo Shuffle. One of the biggest changes to this format is that it's going to be 8 versus 8 as opposed to 10 versus 10 that we can see here. It's going to be a solo queue experience, and obviously there are going to be some problems with doing a Battleground Solo Shuffle style if they wanted to, flip maps or flip sides with the teams. That's not going to be something that looks like is going to be happening. Instead, it's just going to be one singular battleground, and it's not going to be flipping sides. There's going to be some possible composition issues. I do wonder how they're going to determine which classes and which specializations are going to be invited, because obviously one team could have really powerful battleground DPS specializations and the other team doesn't roll the best DPS specializations. I'm thinking typically, some melee DPS like back in Cataclysm, it would have been something like maybe an enhancement shaman is not super spectacular, and this is kind of just determined by the game balance at the time as to whether or not your specialization is going to be powerful, which is why I'm referencing something that is so far back into the past, but it's definitely something that could be a problem. Their format at the moment is looking to be each team will be made up of 2 healers and 5 to 6 damage dealers and 0 to 1 tank. So if a team doesn't have a tank, you're not going to be getting a flag carry map. It's just not going to happen. You're going to be only getting like Arathi Basin, I think, or Gilneas, and possibly the new one that they just remade that I'm spacing out on the name of. You used to carry carts back and forth, and they just turned it into an Arathi Basin clone. Those maps will be the only ones that you'll be getting. Matches that do not include tanks, like I said, will not be Warsong Gulch or Twin Peaks. Matches made with a tank can take place on any map, though, which honestly, that could have a negative impact. My biggest deal with rated battlegrounds, aside from community involvement and toxicity and all that stuff, is game balance. A lot of expansions have had battleground experiences where it's just a permanent stalemate, and sometimes you'll get a battleground like Silver Shard Mines where it's just about crowd controlling and knocking people out of the circle because the classes and the way the tuning is, it's just not possible to take down a player. You just have to control them and hope that you can control the node. So enabling a tank onto a team with 2 healers, only 5 damage dealers on like a control map, I'm a bit worried about engagements and how fast is the gameplay going to be. Maybe they should consider incorporating something like dampening into a battleground, or even just a static amount, not like a ramping up amount, a static amount of healing reduction, because that has been a big problem. I think it's been a big deterrent in terms of getting players involved, because if you're attacking somebody and their health's not going down, it doesn't feel like you're getting anything done. It doesn't feel too great, and that usually ends up being more and more of a problem at the higher ends than it is at the lower ends. Now, this is obviously going to be a little bit less coordinated, likely not being in voice and such, so maybe that isn't necessary, but it is something I would hope that they do take into account and consideration. They are going to be lowering the duration of matches from 10 to 12 minutes as opposed to kind of like 20 to 30, which are the typical lengths for these maps. Big problems with that. I think that they've said that they're going to be increasing the amount of like ramp up a flag carrier is going to take in terms of how much damage they're taking, and they're definitely going to have to do that, because I could see a 10-12 minute game stalemating where both teams can't even cap a flag back depending on how well or how fast they're ramping up that damage taken to the flag carrier. That's something I want to take into consideration. It's really just all about game pacing. It's game pacing and game tuning. And I'm hoping that if it is necessary, that they have ways to add a dampening mechanic or just an overall healing reduction to the bracket if it ends up being an issue. They're going to be doing a test on it today. I think it's September 15th right now. So 3 p.m. PST, they're going to be doing a test. I'll be streaming it. My stream's linked in the description down below. So if you're interested in checking that out live, I'm going to be trying to test out a few roles. I'd ideally like to do a healer, DPS, and a tank just to see what it's like from all perspectives and see what the game pacing is like and if it's really worth your time, right? Because this is the first big update Battlegrounds have been getting. We're not going to be getting any new maps, but we are getting some new things like power-ups. We're going to be getting Shield of Protection, which will provide a large absorb shield. Into the Shadows provides a player with stealth and increased movement speed. So I think that this buff is intended to be so if your team doesn't have a rogue, you'll be able to pick up this buff and go into stealth and have high movement speed. Now, this is something that's probably going to be necessary for almost every map, I would think. Even like Warsong Gulch, if you wanted to sneak in on the enemy flag carrier and you didn't have a stealth on your team, because that's typically a strategy in terms of invading the enemy's base and trying to take down their flag carrier. So really hoping that those are going to be there. But I can tell that these buffs are trying to kind of compensate for if your team doesn't have a certain spec, you can pick this power up to take a substitute to that role. And I think that's a good approach so that, you know, in these instances where you might get an imbalanced team, there's going to be another way to combat it. Rune of Frequency, which is going to increase your cooldown rate, which could be really fun to pick up. I know there's already a power up on that new map that I'm spacing out on the name of at the moment where it just resets all your cooldowns and you get a double tap, but it looks like this is going to be oriented at cooldown rate. So it means like your rotational spells are going to be coming up a lot more frequently, and this could help balance melee DPS that are typically not that great in rated battlegrounds. So they pick up one of these and they're just spamming Rising Sun kicks. They're going to feel really powerful. So again, power-ups to help the specs that are, you know, usually less popular or less powerful in battleground formats, I think is a good idea. Shadow Sight, which is going to provide stealth and invis detection. So they're taking the arena Shadow Sight and bringing it into battlegrounds so that you can kind of detect your enemies coming in. And I think the power-ups is something where they could really experiment a lot more, especially considering that this doesn't take like a huge amount of development time. I can't imagine. You don't need assets. I guess you need these little power-up looking assets that they've got here in terms of picking them up, but it seems like it would be a lot less cumbersome than completely designing a new battleground. But I would really hope that this isn't just going to be a complete substitute for making new battlegrounds, because I would really like some new battlegrounds. I think one of the kind of biggest missed marks for Dragonflight was not doing a dragon riding battleground where you're flying to enemy bases and trying to knock each other off your dragons, then fighting on the ground over objectives. I really think it was a huge missed opportunity to have like one of the most epic experiences in a battleground with that regard, not having been done. And I also think in the past, something like Island Expeditions is another one that could have been really good. PvP Island Expeditions, people didn't do them because you had to manually format the group, and the rewards for it weren't superior to that of the PvE versions. So Island Expeditions just devolved into, I'm only doing this to get my Azerite power and I'm getting out of there. But it actually had a lot of potential to be a really fun format of merging player versus player content as well as player versus environment content. And I think that could have definitely set sail to something bigger. And it's really unfortunate that it just ended up disappearing into this thing you randomly farm transmog from with no potential. Another brawl which I think has a lot of potential, which is the Shadowpan brawl, where it's 5 versus 5 and there's a boss in the middle. You control the circle and you fight it. You guys have probably maybe even never heard of this battleground because it's in a brawl format, and again, brawls don't reward you anything significant, so the participation for that is usually really low. I think the last time that brawl popped up, I couldn't even get a queue to pop, but I actually find the format really fun. That could be an excellent kind of like solo queue battleground style of map or something new to bring into the game baseline. And I'm wondering if they're using the metrics for that brawl and determining that it's not worth their time, but when in reality it's just because it doesn't reward anything. There's a lot of content in World of Warcraft right now that if they strip the rewards from, nobody is going to do them. I can think of a lot of world content right now where if it wasn't giving you gold, wasn't giving you a transmog, wasn't giving you a power up to your power level to get into the raid, guess what? It would be barren with zero participation. So this is something they need to seriously consider, especially when they're using a brawl format to test this, is that if it's not rewarding enough to the end game power level of your character or insane transmogs or unique titles and stuff like that, that the participation is just inherently going to be low. This is one of the main driving factors that I think rated battleground participation is lower than arena, is that it doesn't have a seasonal rank 1 title that's unique. It does have the hero of the horde, but it's the same one every season. Even just taking the arena seasonal name like Obsidian for this season and tossing it onto Obsidian hero of the horde and just tossing on a unique staple to it, I think would actually drive more participation to rated battlegrounds, because when a player looks at it, well, I could play this, get a gladiator mount and a unique reward to this season, or I've already done the rated battleground one. I already have that title. It's the same one for the last 20 years. Like, I don't really need to get another one of those. Who really cares? And rewards are a really big thing that needs to be taken into consideration when implementing something new like this or trying to go after it with experimentations. Now, some of these experimentations are going to be complete format changes. We've got Eye of the Storm, 4 nodes available, but only 2 of them will be capturable at a time, 1 per side, with the middle flag being available to capture. Mage Tower or Draenei or Fel Runes or Blood Elf Tower. So there's kind of splitting the map. These maps will alternate reactivating when you can capture them, which means you don't need someone defending it. You will just permanently hold control of the base until the time elapses where you lose control and everybody needs to go back and fight for them. And I think this is to prevent people from feeling like they have to be a base defender and being in the role of a base defender. And if your team's not winning the team fight, you're going to feel like, well, I mean, I'm defending the base. I held off the rogue. I kept it, but I don't get to win. It's to try and remove the base defender role and orient it more around trying to find combat, trying to fight over an active objective and keep the gameplay moving, which I personally think is possibly going to be maybe more entertaining than even the baseline Eye of the Storm, and maybe something to consider to actually change to the baseline one. Arathi Basin is going to have 5 capturable nodes. They're having increased resource acquisition, again, to shorten the duration of the match. And after you capture a node, you will control it for 45 seconds, and you don't need to defend it. It then deactivates and can be captured again 5 seconds later. To fully capture a node, though, you need to complete the 4-second cast and hold the point for 30 seconds. So you do need to defend for a small amount of time. They'll have a 30-second window to cap it back. Do note it's also a 4-second cast to get the base. So, blinding and capping a base. The fact that they've lowered this means that other classes have a higher opportunity of crowd controlling and taking a base, and it's not just rogues, which again is going to help out with the overall game balance, which I think is good. And again, this could be something that is fun, even for the baseline battlegrounds. Warsong Gulch, they're going to be stacking up faster. I think it's 100% necessary with the game length being low like this. But what it does mean is that tanks with higher mobility are going to be better. So Guardian, Druid, and Vengeance Demon Hunter, I don't know what you're going to do as a prop paladin. Like at Warsong Gulch, you can't jump up the hill or whatever. Maybe they need a power up that makes you jump really high, so you can jump like a Vengeance Demon Hunter or something, because it's just going to be all about how can you not get attacked as long as possible if you're taking this much damage that fast. So there's going to be a huge bias towards some tanks than others. Like if you get the Blood DK and the other team gets the Vengeance or the Guardian, it might be kind of rough. Battle of Gilneas, they're just increasing the resource rate so the game ends faster. And I don't know if they're going to apply the same type of flag defense. Probably not, because it's only 3 bases. For Silver Shard Mines and Temple of Kotmogu, so they are bringing in Temple of Kotmogu. No changes planned initially. These maps are fast-paced already, so picking up the orbs, fighting for them, Silver Shard Mines. Looking ahead, we're approaching this idea in a tempered manner, as adding a new format to PvP is a big commitment. Our intent is to implement this feature as a brawl first, so we can experiment with the format, and I think that is something key that is going to need to take into account. Experiment. Is any sort of healing reduction required? How is balance going to work? Should they have specified like spec limitations, like 1 of each spec? And should each team have a rogue? Should the queue be held for that? And does the spec of the rogue matter? There's a lot to take into account. I'm just glad that battlegrounds are getting some attention, and hopefully this will drive up the participation so that into the future it can make it seem like, hey, we should make some new battlegrounds, or maybe even look to already previously existing modes that kind of fell off and disappeared that could actually be really good and fun, considering the assets and everything are already in the game, like I just talked about. But either way, I just wanted to run down my thoughts here for solo queue rated battlegrounds and what's going on. Let me know in the comments down below what you're excited about. Is this something that's grabbing you? It's going to get you back into World of Warcraft and really get going. If you missed the battlegrounds, maybe it was the community that was driving you away, or just the fact that finding 10 people was really annoying. Now the game is going to do that for you, and it's going to be less. Hopefully the queues will be faster because it's a higher DPS ratio to healers, but it is going to drive participation away from other aspects of the game, which means who knows, the queue times may get worse elsewhere or just not improve overall. They really need to focus on driving overall player base increase if they want to alleviate these queue times, I think, or look to make the healer role more enjoyable or more interactive or more impactful in the game, so you feel like you're having some massive contribution in terms of victory towards your team, so that that role feels more desirable to play. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.